It's still got a lot more space for the pyramid.
Yes, which I think...
How hard is it to live in England and not have like an affected accent? I feel like
you know, you either... I think I've kind of leaned into being the non-accent people.
You're like, sure.
Yeah, I'm almost starting to get this like Tennessee drawl, like I'm from Appalachia. You know, like I want to wear cowboy boots all the time.
Just lean into it.
So the title will change. I think this came from the original proposal or something like that.
Okay.
So I said this context. You know about the hospital. That was my picture of the hospital. And then when we talked about, you know, the different groups that you're good, that you're, and that, you know, they're missionaries. I put these numbers, and I'm not sure these are exactly right with...
Probably close.
Okay.
Yeah, it's probably... Actually, I think it's probably... Because there's not really as much... There's no direct donations. So if we're talking about hospital funding, if we're talking about operational funding.
Okay.
So operationally, in terms of the hospital running, there is actually zero direct Western funding. But in terms of like capital development, it's 100% Western funding. So like all those buildings that are being built are 100% donations that are coming through Surge for construction. And then, so yeah. And I guess the other thing is there's kind of a fuzzy line. Like the other thing is the hospital itself, in terms of providing government-sanctioned medical care, has no direct Western donations, but things like the feeding program, right? Like, is that, it happens, it takes place on hospital property. Everyone views it as the Kibuye Hospital feeding program, but technically it's actually not the hospital that does it. Like the people who work at it, Surge actually pays them, and Surge pays for all the food, and it's manufactured by that little Busoma factory, which again, technically is not actually owned by the hospital, but yes, it's right there in the hospital grounds. Everyone thinks of it as the Kibuye Hospital porridge factory. But so things like that, and then I guess the only other way we kind of fund operations is through this needy patient program. So we end up paying patient fees, but again, that's so hidden that. So I would say, actually, I could give you those numbers in like a day. I'm actually working on that right now.
Okay.
For 2018, but it's something like, it's something to the tune of, I think like a third of it is eye clinic, and a third is surgery, and then a third is everything else. So in terms of like total hospital revenue, it's like a third eye, a third surgery, a third everything else. And of that everything else, a huge chunk is this. Because really, other than once you take out eye and surgery, you're basically left with internal medicine, which is a very small service with very few people, and they don't pay much. OBGYN, which typically then is funded because most of the time it's pregnant women and peds, and the vast majority of them are under 5, so they are funded. So it's sort of the under 5 and pregnant women make up a huge chunk of that everything else.
And are they staying sustainable as far as
The hospital has consistently been it is cash flow positive and profitable for the last number of years. But of course, the huge caveat on that is that, a third of it is surgery, a third of it is eye. Your single biggest expense in both of those is labor, and labor doesn't get paid.
Right.
Basically, the fact that we have surgeons and ophthalmologists here is what allows the hospital to make that 66% of their money. But our ophthalmologist, our anesthesiologist, and our 2 surgeons work for free. So
Right.
that's basically how we indirectly fund the operations to allow the hospital to remain sustainable.
Right. And that's hard because it doesn't really show up in the ledger.
Right. Yeah.
Now, is the goal still at some point to be able to replace everybody that's Western with Burundians and still stay at this cash flow?
Yeah, and that has started to shift. Like, we now have a Burundian surgeon and we have a Burundian ophthalmologist, which is a big deal because those are the first specialists. I mean, they're some of the only specialists, there's not many in the whole country, but it's the first time we've had any Burundian specialists here that have gone out of the country, done their surgical residency, and have come back. So now, we have a Burundian surgeon. We have 3 surgeons now. One of them is Burundian. We have, 2 ophthalmologists. One of them is Burundian. So But it'll probably take. It's clearly going to take, years for that. Partially just because, even if we could find the Burundian specialists to replace us now, which we couldn't, that sudden influx of paid labor would sink the hospital. Because if all the sort of Western specialists left, the hospital would lose some of its status and its, capacity, and we'd have lower revenue, and then we would increase the expenses. So the hospital would flip into the red really fast.
Okay. But you guys have years to figure it out.
Yep.
Cool. Okay. And then, let's see, I put some more pictures of the hospital. So what I said is why we're interested in it is that you're not just like the standard one, you're interesting. And then I said, from a theory perspective, if you look at all of the social entrepreneurship stuff, it's like this. It's like market logic versus social welfare logic.
Yeah.
And then, what we talked about was more, there's all these different hospital, government, university layers. And then we talked about what we just said, you're serving the very poorest, you're sustainable. And the very poorest, from a theory perspective, often really get missed. Whenever people talk about serving the poor, it's usually a step or two.
It's usually the lower middle class in India or something, who can afford to buy something.
Yeah, it's people that have disposable income and so I think it's interesting. And then this is what I talked about when we started, and I think what you'll see is that this is what I don't think the issue is anymore. But we had talked about this identity dichotomy between having foreign Christian missionaries and then being a Burundian hospital and, having to, and, being one of the few groups that hasn't been kicked out because you're Burundian, you're not national. But I don't know. So when I was looking at the literature, when I came in, I said, here are the things that have been in the back of my mind at least, which is the social enterprise and this idea that you're not just this for-profit versus non-profit. You have all these other kind of logics happening. Reaching the very poorest, inside or outside, and then the bricolage. So this is like when I came last time, this is what we talked about. Yeah. And then as far as methodology, it's a case study. Insider, outsider, you're clearly insider, I'm clearly outsider. There's a picture of you.
There's the insider.
There's the insider.
Our mole.
So those are the different types of people we wanted to talk to. There's a picture of you at the
No, at the guard at the Ebola hand washing station.